cruel teacher called the maid's daughter a fraud, certain a general father was a lie. But the teacher's arrogance shattered the moment those 4 stars walked in. Your father is a 4-star general, and your mother cleans houses for a living? The words weren't a question, they were an accusation. The sound of tearing paper followed, echoing off the walls like a slammed door. Mrs. Vance stood over 10-year-old Mia, ripping her assignment into bitter confetti. She branded the child a liar, fueled by a rigid belief that a humble background meant a dishonest heart. But Mrs. Vance made a grave miscalculation. She assumed the father was a fantasy. She didn't know he was already walking down the hallway. Her father was a hero, but in her classroom, she was just a liar. The lie, as Mrs. Eleanor Vance saw it, was breathtaking in its audacity. A 4-star general, she repeated, the words dripping with a special kind of classroom scorn, the kind reserved for children who color outside the lines or tell tales too tall for their small bodies. Your father is a 4-star general, and your mother cleans houses for a living? She didn't whisper it. She announced it. Her voice, usually a tool of patient instruction, was now a sharp instrument, cutting through the quiet hum of the 4th-grade classroom at Northwood Elementary. Every pair of 9 and 10-year-old eyes snapped toward the front of the room, where 10-year-old Mia Thompson stood frozen, her carefully written assignment clutched in her hand. That is, without a doubt, the most fanciful story I have heard in my 18 years of teaching, Mrs. Vance declared. She snatched the paper from Mia's grasp. The sheet was filled with Mia's neatest cursive, a tribute she had spent all morning perfecting. A tearing sound sliced through the silence. Once, twice, the sound echoed off the cinder-block walls, a sound more final than a slammed door. Mrs. Vance ripped the assignment into quarters, then eighths. The pieces of paper, covered in Mia's proud words, fluttered down like bitter confetti, landing on the scuffed toes of her simple, clean sneakers. We do not invent stories to make ourselves feel important, Amelia, Mrs. Vance said, her voice dropping to a cold, instructive tone. Generals are pillars of our society. They live in grand homes in Fort Myer or on sprawling bases. Their children attend prestigious private academies. She took a step closer, her shadow falling over the small, blonde-haired girl. Their wives certainly do not spend their days on their hands and knees scrubbing other people's floors. She leaned in, her voice now a conspiratorial whisper meant for the entire class to hear. And their daughters do not come to school looking like you do. Humble. The word was meant to be an insult, a synonym for poor and plain. Mia's world tilted. Her hands, small and trembling, hung empty at her sides. She could feel every stare like a physical touch. Jessica Albright, whose father was a CEO, was watching with wide, curious eyes. Noah, her best friend, looked horrified, his mouth slightly agape. Mrs. Vance crumpled the torn pieces of Mia's tribute into a tight ball. She walked calmly to the wastebasket by her desk and dropped the paper ball in. The soft thud was the final punctuation mark on Mia's humiliation. Pathetic, she murmured, just loud enough for the front row to hear. Now sit down. Perhaps you can write something truthful this time. Have you ever seen a child's spirit break? It doesn't happen with a loud crash. It happens in the silent, trembling moments after the blow has landed, when a little girl who did nothing but tell the truth about her father is made to feel like a liar in front of everyone she knows. Just 3 hours earlier, Mia's world had been full of quiet joy. She woke not to an alarm clock, but to the distant, rhythmic sound of her father's morning workout in the living room. The soft thumps of his feet on the floorboards were as reliable as the sunrise. Their family lived in a simple 2-bedroom apartment in a modest building on the edge of Arlington. It was a place of clean lines and minimal fuss, chosen for its anonymity, not its prestige. The walls were painted a simple off-white, adorned with Mia's artwork and a few framed family photos. There were no grand portraits in uniform, no glass cases filled with medals, no swords mounted over the fireplace. Her father, General Michael Thompson, called it security through obscurity. To him, the safest place for his family was a place no one would ever look for them. In the small, sunlit kitchen, Mia found him at the table. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was in a worn gray t-shirt and athletic shorts, a sheen of sweat on his brow. He looked like any other dad, maybe a high school gym teacher or a construction worker. He was sipping water from a glass, reading a dense-looking book about military history. Her mother, Maria Thompson, was already dressed for work in practical jeans and a simple polo shirt, her dark hair tied back in a neat ponytail. She was packing a tote bag with cleaning supplies. She turned from the counter, a warm smile on her face as Mia entered. "There's my brave soldier," her father said, his voice a low, gentle rumble that always made Mia feel safe. "Ready for the big day?" Mia nodded, her heart thumping with excitement. Today was career day at Northwood Elementary. For weeks, she had been dreaming of this. "Can I tell them?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "About the time you had dinner with the president at the White House." General Thompson exchanged a look with his wife. It was a silent conversation they'd had 1,000 times. Maria placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. It was the look that said, "She has a right to be proud, Michael. She pays the price for your job, too." "Mia, honey, remember our talk?" her father said, turning his full attention to her. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, were serious but kind. "Some parts of my job have to stay private. It's to keep us all safe. You understand that, right?" Mia nodded, a familiar pang of disappointment in her chest. She did understand, but it didn't seem fair. Jessica Albright got to tell everyone her dad flew to Europe on a private jet. Noah got to talk about his dad's construction company building a new skyscraper downtown. Their lives were out in the open, things to be shared and admired. Her family's life was a collection of secrets, whispered behind closed doors. "But everyone else gets to brag," she mumbled into her cereal bowl. "He deserves this, Michael," Maria said softly, her hand still on his. "He deserves for his daughter to stand up in front of her class and say his name with pride." The general looked at his daughter, and the firm set of his jaw softened. "I know. You're right." He reached across the table and took Mia's hand. His was large and calloused, but his grip was gentle. "Just keep it simple today, okay, sweetheart? You don't need to tell them everything. Just tell them you're proud. That's enough. You don't have to prove anything to anyone." Mia finished her breakfast, the excitement returning. She didn't know that in a few short hours, the simple truth would become the most complicated thing in the world. Northwood Elementary was a microcosm of Arlington itself, a sprawling brick building that served a diverse cross-section of the community. There were children of diplomats and senators, whose gleaming black cars dropped them off at the front circle. There were children of military families, rotating in and out with each new posting. And there were children like Mia, whose parents worked the service jobs that kept the city running, cleaning the grand houses, serving the important dinners, maintaining the pristine office buildings. It was supposed to be a place where a child's worth wasn't measured by their parents' tax bracket. But Mrs. Eleanor Vance had been teaching at Northwood for 18 years. And in that time, she had formed a rigid, unshakable sense of the world's order. Her classroom was a shrine to her worldview. The walls were decorated with framed photos of her with local politicians and a certificate for Teacher of the Year from nearly a decade ago. She wore a small, tasteful flag pin on her lapel every day. She had never known financial hardship, never lived in a modest apartment, never worried about making rent. She saw the world in clear, distinct categories, and she knew exactly which box the parents of her students belonged in. And in her mind, a maid and a four-star general simply did not belong in the same family. The career day assignment was announced after the morning pledge. "Class," Mrs. Vance said, her voice bright and cheerful. "In honor of our parent guests who will be arriving later, I want you to write a short paragraph. Tell us what your parents do for a living and why their work is important to our community." She moved through the aisles, a serene smile on her face. "Take your time. Use your best handwriting. I want to be proud to share these with our visitors." A quiet scratching of pencils filled the room. Mia took a deep breath, her pencil held tight in her hand. This was her moment. In careful, looping cursive, she began to write. "My father is General Michael Thompson. He is a four-star general in the United States Army. He has served our country for over 30 years, in places all over the world. His job is to lead soldiers and make important decisions that help keep our country safe. Being a four-star general is very rare. My dad says his most important job is taking care of the people he leads. My mother is Maria Thompson. She takes care of our family and also works hard helping other families keep their homes beautiful and clean. My dad says her job is just as important as his, because she brings order and peace to people's lives, and that is a kind of service, too. I am proud of both of my parents. They taught me that all work has dignity and that serving others is the most important thing you can do. She read it over, her heart swelling with pride. It was simple. It was honest. It was perfect. Noah, sitting in the desk next to hers, leaned over. Is your dad really a general? He whispered, his eyes wide with awe. Like in the movies? Mia nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. Yeah, but he doesn't like to talk about it much. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Noah breathed. My dad just pours concrete. My dad says building things that last is one of the most important jobs there is, Mia whispered back, repeating a lesson she'd heard many times. Your dad helps build our whole city. Noah beamed. It was then that Mrs. Vance's shadow fell across their desks. She had moved with the silent, sudden grace of a predator. She leaned down, her perfume sharp and floral, and read the words on Mia's paper. Mia watched as the teacher's lips tightened, pressing together into a thin, bloodless line. A flicker of something cold and dismissive passed through her eyes. Mia's stomach twisted into a knot. She had seen that look before. It was the same look the receptionist at the fancy doctor's office gave her mother. It was the look a saleswoman at a department store gave them when they were just browsing. It was the look that said, "You don't belong here." But Mrs. Vance said nothing. Not yet. She simply straightened up, walked back to her desk, and made a small, precise note in her day planner. As the morning dragged on, a soft buzz came from Mia's backpack. It was her emergency phone, a simple device for her parents to reach her. During a brief bathroom break, she checked the message. It was from her father. Change of plans, sweetheart. A meeting at the Pentagon was canceled. I'm on my way to your school now. Should be there by 10 a.m. Don't tell your mom. Let's make it a surprise. Mia's spirit soared. He was coming. He wasn't supposed to be able to make it because of a top-secret briefing. But now he was coming. He would be here, in her classroom. Everyone would see. Mrs. Vance would see. She hurried back to her seat, a grin she couldn't contain spreading across her face. She didn't notice the teacher watching her, her expression hardening with suspicion. Mrs. Vance had already cast her judgment. Amelia Thompson was a girl with an overactive imagination, a child from a struggling family who was making up stories for attention. And today, in front of the entire class and their distinguished parents, Mrs. Vance was going to teach her a lesson about the importance of knowing her place. What she couldn't possibly know was that in less than an hour, the truth would walk through her classroom door wearing 4 silver stars on each shoulder. And the carefully constructed world of Mrs. Eleanor Vance was about to be torn apart, piece by piece. The parents began to arrive at 9:30 a.m., a parade of Arlington's professional class. There was Mr. Albright, Jessica's father, a CEO with a booming voice and an expensive suit. There was Dr. Chun, a renowned surgeon still in his light blue scrubs. There was Mrs. Davies, an architect who brought a rolled-up blueprint to show the children. Mrs. Vance greeted each of them with a deference that bordered on reverence, her smile wide and genuine. Maria Thompson was not among them. She was across town, cleaning a large house in a wealthy neighborhood, a job she had kept for years because it gave her a sense of normalcy and independence, a quiet life away from the rigid structure of the military world. Mia sat at her desk, her leg bouncing with a nervous energy she couldn't quell. She kept glancing at the clock on the wall, its slow, deliberate ticks marking the minutes until her father's arrival. 10 o'clock. Any minute now. All right, class. Mrs. Vance clapped her hands together, her voice ringing with authority. Before our wonderful guests begin their presentations, I'd love for some of you to share the paragraphs you wrote this morning. It's so important for us to honor the work our parents do. Her eyes scanned the room. Jessica, why don't you start us off? Jessica Albright stood, her posture perfect. She read in a clear, confident voice about her father's company, about international business and shareholder meetings. Mrs. Vance beamed as if she herself had negotiated the deals. Wonderful, Jessica, a true leader in our community. One by one, other students read. An accountant, a lawyer, a software engineer. Each was met with polite applause and a warm smile from Mrs. Vance. Then, her eyes landed on Mia. Amelia Thompson, you're next. The room fell quiet. Mia stood up, her paper trembling in her hands. She had rewritten it on a fresh sheet of notebook paper after Mrs. Vance had destroyed the first one. She had left out the part about her mother. This time, it was just about her dad. She took a shaky breath and began to read. My father is General Michael Thompson. He is a 4-star general in the United States Army. He has served our country for over 30 years. She didn't get any further. Stop. The word was not loud, but it had the force of a physical blow. The visiting parents looked up from their phones, their polite smiles faltering. Every child in the room held their breath. Mrs. Vance rose slowly from her chair behind her desk, her expression a mask of disappointment. Amelia, please bring that paper to me. Her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Mia walked the long journey to the front of the classroom. The floor seemed to stretch on for miles. She handed the paper to her teacher. Mrs. Vance glanced at it for a fraction of a second before setting it down on her desk, a gesture of dismissal. Class, and our honored guests, Mrs. Vance began, her voice taking on the tone of a moral philosopher delivering a sermon. This provides us with a valuable teaching moment. We've been talking about virtues this year. Honesty, integrity, humility. She placed a hand on Mia's shoulder. It felt heavy, proprietary. Amelia, I am going to give you a chance to be honest with all of us right now. The real truth. What does your father actually do for a living? Mia's throat felt tight. He's a general. Mrs. Vance's eyes narrowed. A sad, pitying smile touched her lips. My dear girl, I have been an educator in this community for nearly 2 decades. I know generals' families. I have taught their children. They are part of a very specific, very public world. She gestured vaguely toward the window, as if indicating a world Mia could not possibly belong to. They don't live in the Northwood apartment complex. Their children don't look so worried all the time. A few nervous titters rippled through the students. Mr. Albright shifted uncomfortably in his small chair. But it's true, Mia insisted, her voice small but clear. He keeps a low profile. For security. For security? Mrs. Vance's laugh was a short, sharp bark of disbelief. Oh, you mean like secret missions and classified documents? Amelia, that is the stuff of movies, not real life for a 4th grader. Jessica Albright raised her hand. Mrs. Vance, maybe his dad is like a different kind of general? Thank you for your generous spirit, Jessica, the teacher said, patting her prized student's shoulder. But kindness does not excuse dishonesty. This is about character. She turned her full attention back to Mia, her face hardening. I took the liberty of checking your school registration forms this morning, Amelia. Your mother filled them out. She listed your father's occupation as government employee. A very respectable job, to be sure. But it is a far cry from a 4-star general, isn't it? Tears welled in Mia's eyes, hot and shameful. She writes that on purpose. So people don't. So we can be normal. Enough. Mrs. Vance's voice sharpened, losing its patient veneer. I will not have you stand here and continue this charade. You will go back to your seat. You will write a new paragraph about your father's actual government job, and you will apologize to me, to your classmates, and to our guests for wasting our time with these fantasies. The tears spilled over, tracing silent paths down her flushed cheeks. But she didn't move. She couldn't. It felt like her feet were rooted to the floor. Amelia, I said, sit down. My dad taught me never to apologize for telling the truth, Mia whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. A collective gasp went through the room. The air crackled with tension. Several parents exchanged wide-eyed looks. Mrs. Vance's face, which had been a mask of condescending pity, was now flushing a deep, angry red. What did you just say to me? He's a general, Mia repeated, a new resolve hardening her voice. He's on his way here. He's coming from the Pentagon. He'll be here any minute. You'll see. The clock on the wall read 10:02 a.m. To the principal's office. Now. Mrs. Vance's voice was a low, furious command. Noah stood up abruptly. But Mrs. Vance, she's not lying. I've seen pictures of her dad's medals. Noah, sit down before you join her. Mrs. Vance snapped, pointing a trembling finger at the boy. Noah sank back into his chair, his face a mixture of fear and frustration. He shot Mia a helpless, apologetic look. Mia turned and walked toward the door, her backpack clutched in her hands like a shield. As she reached the threshold, Mrs. Vance delivered her parting shot, her voice ringing out for all to hear. Let this be a lesson to all of you, she announced to the silent room. Character is not about the grand stories we tell. It's about accepting who we are with honesty and grace. Trying to be something you are not, especially when you come from a humble background, is the deepest failure of character a person can have. Mia paused at the door, her small shoulders squared. She had 90 minutes of school left, but it felt like a lifetime. 90 minutes of being the girl who lied, the girl who came from a humble background, the girl whose own teacher had branded her a pathetic fraud. She had no idea that Mrs. Vance, a woman supremely confident in her judgment, was about to have the longest and worst day of her professional life. The hallway of Northwood Elementary had never felt so long. Each step Mia took toward the principal's office was a small, lonely echo in the vast, quiet space. The cheerful, crayon-colored posters on the walls seemed to mock her. Be a buddy, not a bully. The truth will set you free. Her sneakers, usually silent, squeaked a mournful rhythm against the polished linoleum floor. From behind the closed doors of other classrooms, she could hear the muffled sounds of learning. A teacher reading a story, a burst of children's laughter, the drone of a history lesson. It was a normal school day for everyone else. For Mia, the world had been knocked off its axis. She clutched the straps of her pink backpack, her knuckles white. She replayed Mrs. Vance's words in her head. Humble background. Failure of character. Pathetic. The words were like sharp stones, bruising her from the inside. Was this what her parents meant when they talked about sacrifice? Was being the daughter of a soldier and a housekeeper a reason to be ashamed? Her father's voice, calm and steady, rose in her memory. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. But that was before. Now, it felt like she had to prove everything. The main office was a small, tidy space that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. A large clock on the wall read 10:07 a.m. Her dad was late. A cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. What if the meeting wasn't canceled? What if he couldn't come after all? The school's secretary, Mrs. Gable, a kind woman with soft gray hair and glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked up from her computer. Her friendly smile faltered when she saw Mia's tear-streaked face. "Oh, honey, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "Mrs. Vance sent me to see the principal," Mia mumbled, staring at the floor. Mrs. Gable's expression shifted to one of professional neutrality. She had been here long enough to know not to take sides. "All right, have a seat, dear. I'll let Mr. Henderson know you're here." Mia sat in a hard plastic chair that was too big for her. Her feet dangled inches above the floor. She watched Mrs. Gable press a button on her phone. "Mr. Henderson? Amelia Thompson is here to see you." "Yes," from Mrs. Vance's class. A moment later, the door to the principal's office opened. Mr. David Henderson was a tall man in his late 40s with a tidy haircut and a weary but patient smile. He wasn't a scary principal. He was the kind who gave high fives in the hallway and told bad jokes at school assemblies. But today, his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Amelia, come on in," he said, gesturing to the chair in front of his large, imposing desk. The office was filled with books, school memorabilia, and a large, framed map of the United States. It was supposed to be a welcoming place, but to Mia, it felt like a courtroom. She sat down, her hands folded primly in her lap. Mr. Henderson sat opposite her, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk. He steepled his fingers, a gesture Mia recognized from watching important men on the news. "So," he began, his voice calm and measured. "Mrs. Vance called down a few minutes ago. She tells me there was a bit of a misunderstanding in class during the career day presentations." Mia nodded, not trusting her voice. "She says you wrote an assignment with some information that wasn't quite accurate, and that when she asked you to correct it, you refused. Is that about right?" "It is accurate," Mia said, her voice small but firm. "What I wrote is the truth." Mr. Henderson sighed, a long, tired sound. "Amelia, I've been a principal for a long time. I know that sometimes, when we admire someone, we can get a little carried away. We want them to be larger than life. Like superheroes. That's a wonderful thing. It shows how much you love your father." He paused, giving her a gentle, understanding smile. "But in a school assignment, we have to stick to the facts. It's part of learning to be a responsible student." He picked up a manila folder from his desk. It had her name on it in black marker. "I have your student file right here. It says your father, Michael Thompson, is a government employee. That's a very important job. He works for our country. You should be very proud of that." "He is a general," Mia repeated, frustration building inside her. Why wouldn't anyone listen? A 4-star general. My mom writes government employee on the forms for our safety. He told her to. Mr. Henderson's patient smile tightened at the edges. Security reasons. Yes, Mrs. Vance mentioned you said that. He leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking in protest. Amelia, I need you to think very carefully. A four-star general is one of the highest-ranking officers in the entire military. There are very, very few of them. Their lives are often very public. We would know if a student at our school was the daughter of a four-star general. There are protocols, security briefings for the school. It's a very big deal. He was talking to her like she was a toddler, explaining why the sky was blue. It made her feel small and foolish. He just doesn't like a lot of fuss, Mia said, her voice trembling. He says the soldiers are the real heroes. And I'm sure he is a wonderful man, Mr. Henderson said smoothly. But this story has gotten a little out of hand, don't you think? It started as a small exaggeration, and now it's grown into a big problem. You've upset your teacher, disrupted the class, and now you're here with me. Just then, the phone on his desk buzzed. He held up a finger to Mia. Excuse me for one moment. He pressed the speaker button. Yes, Mrs. Gable. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Henderson. The secretary's voice crackled through the small speaker. There's a man on the line, a Colonel Davis. He says he's calling from the Pentagon, from General Thompson's office, to confirm the general's arrival time. He says they're running about 15 minutes behind schedule. I thought it might be some kind of prank. Mr. Henderson's eyes flickered toward Mia. He saw a little girl with big, hopeful eyes, and he made an assumption, just as Mrs. Vance had. This was part of the fantasy. The child had probably put a friend's older brother up to it. It was sad, really, how far she was willing to take this. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, he said, his voice laced with a weary authority. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Tell the caller that this is a secure school line, and we don't accept unsolicited calls. If he has a legitimate reason to contact the school, he can send an official email. He clicked off the phone before Mrs. Gable could respond. He turned back to Mia, his expression now less patient and more stern. Amelia, this has to stop. Involving other people in this story is not acceptable. You are a good student. You are bright. You are kind. And you have never been in trouble before. I don't want to see you go down this path. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping. Here is what we are going to do. You are going to go back to Mrs. Vance's classroom. You are going to quietly take your seat. When she gives you a moment, you are going to apologize for being disruptive. You will rewrite your assignment with the correct information. And then, this entire incident will be forgotten. No mark on your record, no phone call home. We can pretend it never happened. Do you understand? Mia looked at the clock on the wall behind him. 10:15 a.m. Her father was supposed to be here 15 minutes ago. The phone call, the secretary had said they were running 15 minutes late. That meant he could be here any minute. She took a deep breath. She could do what Mr. Henderson said. She could apologize, write a lie on a piece of paper, and make it all go away. She could go back to being the quiet, good girl in the third row. Or she could trust her father. She could believe in the truth, even if no one else did. No, she said. Mr. Henderson blinked, taken aback. No, I won't apologize for telling the truth, Mia said. The words came out stronger than she expected. And I won't write a lie. The principal's face hardened. The last traces of his patient, understanding demeanor vanished. I see. Well, Amelia, you are leaving me with no choice. Disrespect and defiance are serious issues. He stood up, his tall frame seeming to fill the entire office. Return to class. You will sit there, and you will not participate until I have a chance to call your mother and schedule a conference. With both of you. He was using her mother as a threat. The thought of her mom having to leave work, to come into this office and be lectured because her daughter told the truth about her father, made Mia's blood boil. Mr. Henderson opened the door and gestured for her to walk ahead of him. Let's go. The walk back to room 112 was even more agonizing than the walk to the office. This time, she wasn't just a student in trouble. She was a problem to be managed, a defiant child being returned to her cage. Mr. Henderson walked a few paces behind her, his hard-soled shoes clicking a steady, authoritative beat on the floor. When he opened the classroom door, every head snapped in their direction. The career day presentations had paused. Mr. Albright, the CEO, was mid-sentence, talking about quarterly earnings reports. The room was thick with a tense, expectant silence. All the parents, all the students, they were all staring at her. At the little liar. Mrs. Vance, Mr. Henderson said in a low, official voice. Amelia will be rejoining you. She is to remain at her desk and work on an alternative assignment until I can speak with her mother. She will not be participating further in today's activities. Mrs. Vance gave a short, triumphant nod. It was the look of a person whose judgment had been validated by a higher authority. Mia walked back to her desk, her face burning with shame. She slid into her chair, avoiding Noah's worried gaze. She felt completely and utterly alone, an island in a sea of disbelief. She stared down at the smooth, empty surface of her desk. The clock on the wall now read 10:22 a.m. Her dad had said he'd be there. He had promised. But as the seconds ticked by, a terrible, heavy doubt began to settle in her heart. Maybe Mrs. Vance and Mr. Henderson were right. Maybe she had just imagined it all. Maybe her whole life was a fanciful story, and this was the moment the fantasy finally shattered. Then, from the hallway, came a new sound. It wasn't the squeak of sneakers or the click of a principal's shoes. It was the sound of multiple pairs of heavy, polished boots moving in perfect, practiced unison. It was a sound of purpose, of authority, of a world that did not ask for permission to enter. Heads turned toward the classroom door. Mrs. Gable, the secretary, appeared in the doorway, her face pale and flustered. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice a reedy whisper. "You have visitors." Mr. Henderson turned, a flicker of annoyance on his face at the interruption. "Yes, Mrs. Gable, what is it?" "I'm in the middle of—" He stopped. Standing just behind the flustered secretary were two men. They were not parents. They were tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark, impeccably tailored suits with earpieces discreetly fitted into their ears. Their eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the room in a single, practiced glance, assessing every person, every exit, with an unnerving stillness. They moved with a silent, coordinated grace that was completely alien to the cheerful chaos of an elementary school. Mr. Henderson's mouth went dry. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice a few notes higher than usual. One of the men gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't look at the principal. He looked past him, his gaze fixed on a point in the hallway. Then he stepped aside, and then he walked in. The man who entered the classroom was not just a father. He was an event. He was tall, with a commanding presence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He was wearing the United States Army dress blue uniform, a garment of such crisp precision it looked like it was forged from midnight and honor. On his chest was a breathtaking display of medals and ribbons, a rainbow of courage that told a silent story of service in faraway, dangerous places. On each shoulder, set against the dark blue fabric, were 4 silver stars. They caught the fluorescent lights of the classroom and seemed to burn with a cold, brilliant fire. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The room didn't just go quiet. It went utterly, profoundly still. The low hum of the building's ventilation system, a sound no one had noticed a moment before, was now a roar in the dead silence. Mr. Albright, the CEO who commanded boardrooms, involuntarily straightened his tie and stood up. Dr. Chun, the surgeon, put a hand to her chest. Every parent in the room, without a word or a signal, slowly rose to their feet in a spontaneous, unified show of respect. Mr. Henderson stared, his mind struggling to process the scene. He saw the uniform. He saw the medals. He saw the 4 impossible stars. And then he remembered the phone call he had dismissed as a prank. Colonel Davis, from General Thompson's office. A wave of cold dread washed over him, so intense it made his knees feel weak. But it was Mrs. Eleanor Vance who had the most visceral reaction. She was standing near her desk, a smug, self-satisfied expression still lingering on her face from her victory over Mia. As the general stepped into the room, she followed everyone's gaze. Her eyes went from the man's face, to the uniform, to the 4 stars. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her face a pasty, sickly white. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed world she inhabited, a world of clear social strata and unshakable assumptions, was shattering before her very eyes. The humble background she had mocked, the fanciful story she had torn to pieces, was now a 6'2" reality standing in her classroom. She took a half-step back, her hand fumbling for the edge of her desk, as if to steady herself. The general's gaze swept the room once, his clear blue eyes taking in the scene. the parents standing awkwardly, the stunned teachers, the wide-eyed children. But his eyes didn't linger on any of them. They searched the room for only one person. They found her, sitting small and alone at her desk in the third row. Mia had been staring at her hands, lost in her misery. But the sudden, absolute silence made her look up. She saw the men in suits, and then she saw him. Her father. Not Dad in his worn gray t-shirt. Not Dad in his simple weekend jeans. This was General Michael Thompson. The man she had only seen in pictures and history books her dad kept in his study. And he was looking right at her. Everything she had been holding inside, the shame, the fear, the desperate hope, broke free. "Dad," she whispered. The word was small, fragile, but in the silent room, it was a thunderclap. The professional mask on General Thompson's face cracked. The soldier disappeared, and for a single, powerful moment, he was just a father. He saw his daughter's tear-stained face, her slumped shoulders, and the empty desk where her tribute should have been. The sight seemed to wound him more than any physical blow ever could. He ignored the principal. He ignored the teacher. He crossed the room in 3 long, purposeful strides that spoke of battlefields and command tents. He didn't care about protocol or the stunned audience. He knelt, the crisp fabric of his uniform creasing as he brought himself down to her level, right there in the aisle between the desks. He gently took her small, trembling hands in his. "I'm here, Mia," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble meant only for her. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm so sorry I was late. The traffic from the Pentagon was difficult." Mia launched herself into his arms, burying her face in the starched, unfamiliar fabric of his uniform. She sobbed, not with the quiet, shameful tears from before, but with great, shuddering waves of relief. He was real. He was here. She wasn't a liar. She held on to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had been spinning out of control. He held her just as tightly, one large, steady hand stroking her blonde hair. The embrace lasted no more than 20 seconds, but in that time, the entire story of the morning was rewritten. Every parent in that room, every child, every administrator, understood the profound injustice they had just witnessed. They had watched a teacher systematically dismantle a child's spirit for the crime of telling the truth. And now, they were watching a father put the pieces back together. General Thompson gently set Mia back in her chair, though he kept one hand firmly on her shoulder, a silent promise of protection. He stood to his full height, his posture once again that of a commander. He turned, not to Mrs. Vance, but to the principal, who was now standing by the door, looking utterly lost. "Principal Henderson, I presume." The general's voice was calm, professional, but it carried an authority that made the principal's title sound flimsy and insignificant. Yes, sir. General," Mr. Henderson stammered, his face flushed with embarrassment. We weren't expecting. I apologize for the confusion at the entrance." "The confusion was not at the entrance, Mr. Henderson," the general stated simply. The words were not an accusation. They were a statement of fact, which made them all the more damning. His eyes moved from the principal to the teacher, who was now standing frozen by her desk, looking like a statue carved from fear. "You must be Mrs. Vance," he said. His tone was level, without a trace of anger, yet it was the most intimidating sound Mrs. Vance had ever heard. Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "General, I can explain. There was a terrible misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding." The general repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. "My daughter was called a liar in front of her peers and visiting parents. Her schoolwork, a tribute to her family, was torn up and thrown in the garbage. She was publicly shamed and sent from the room for speaking the truth about her father's service to this country." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Please, Mrs. Vance, explain to me exactly which part of that was a misunderstanding." Mrs. Vance paled further. She had no answer. Every reason she had cooked up in her mind now sounded like the pathetic excuse it was. She lives in an apartment. Her mother cleans houses. She doesn't look the part. How could she say those things to this man? This man who embodied a level of dignity and service she couldn't possibly comprehend. I didn't know," she finally managed to say, the words choking her. "There was no way for me to verify." "You did not verify," the general corrected her, his voice still quiet, still precise. "You assumed. You made a judgment about my daughter about my wife, about my family, based on nothing more than your own narrow prejudice. You saw a housekeeper and a little girl in simple clothes, and you decided their truth was impossible. He adjusted the cuff of his uniform jacket. Ma'am, I have led men and women in situations where a wrong assumption can cost lives. I have learned, the hard way, that assumptions based on how someone looks, where they live, or what you think you know about them are almost always wrong. And they are always dangerous. He looked from Mrs. Vance to Mr. Henderson, whose face was a mask of professional agony. And you, sir? My office called ahead to inform you of my arrival. A courtesy. Your secretary was told it was a prank. Mr. Henderson looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. General, I take full responsibility. It was an error in judgment. A grave error. It was more than that, General Thompson said, his voice finally allowing a sliver of cold anger to show through. It was a failure to listen. A failure to believe a child. My child. He turned back to the class, his hand still resting on Mia's shoulder. His voice softened as he addressed the wide-eyed students. Good morning, he said, as if he were just another career day guest. My name is General Michael Thompson. I am Mia's father. I apologize for being late and for interrupting your day. He looked down at Mia, and a hint of a smile touched his lips. I promised my daughter I would be here. And the first rule of being a soldier and a father is you do not break your promises. He then turned his gaze back to Mrs. Vance, who seemed to shrink under its weight. Ma'am, I understand there was some question regarding the content of my daughter's assignment. The room was so quiet you could hear the frantic beating of Mrs. Vance's heart. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, a fish gasping for air. No words came. She had built her career, her very identity, on being the authority in the room. Now, she was a student being dressed down, and she had no answers. Principal Henderson, seeing his teacher flounder, stepped forward, attempting to regain a shred of control. General Thompson, please. We are deeply honored by your presence. Perhaps you would be willing to speak to the students about your career? We would all be fascinated to hear. It was a desperate attempt to change the subject, to smooth over the gaping wound in the room's decorum. The general considered it for a moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. I will. He turned back to the class, his posture erect, his voice resonating with a quiet power that commanded attention far more effectively than a shout ever could. Mia, still seated, held onto the sleeve of his uniform, anchoring herself to him. My daughter, Amelia, wrote in her assignment that I am a 4-star general in the United States Army. That is correct, he began, his voice clear and steady. She wrote that I have served this country for 32 years. That is also correct. I have been stationed in places like Germany and South Korea. I have commanded soldiers in combat zones in Iraq and Afghanistan. Today, my job is here in Washington, D.C., at the Pentagon, where I work with other leaders to help form our nation's military strategy. The students stared, their mouths agape. This wasn't like the other parents' presentations. This was history, alive and breathing in their classroom. Noah looked at Mia with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. Jessica Albright, the CEO's daughter, looked as though she was seeing a real-life superhero for the first time. The general's eyes softened as he looked down at his daughter. Mia also wrote that my wife, her mother, works hard cleaning homes, and that her work is a form of service. She is absolutely correct. He looked out at the parents and teachers. My wife, Maria, is the strongest person I know. For 30 years, she has managed our home, raised our daughter, and held our family together through a dozen moves and 6 combat deployments. She has endured Christmases alone, birthdays on a video call, and years of uncertainty. The work she does for other families, bringing order and peace to their homes, is her choice. It is work she takes pride in. It is work that has dignity. Any person who believes that one form of service is more honorable than another does not understand the meaning of the word. His gaze settled once more on Mrs. Vance. When a child in your care tells you their truth, ma'am, especially a truth that might not fit neatly into the little boxes you have created for the world, your first duty is not to doubt. It is to listen, to assume the best in them, not the worst. You teach these children about character. But what character is there in a world that judges a family by the size of their house instead of the size of their sacrifice? The silence that followed was heavy with shame. It was broken by a small, choked sob. It came from Mrs. Vance. The tears she had forced upon Mia earlier were now her own. They streamed down her face, washing away the last of her rigid composure. "General," she whispered, her voice cracking. I owe your daughter an apology." She didn't wait for his permission. She turned to face Mia, her eyes red and pleading. She walked the few steps to Mia's desk and knelt, just as the general had done. It was an act of profound surrender, a teacher kneeling before her student. "Mia," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong. I made assumptions about you. I judged you and your family based on my own ignorance. I didn't believe you. And because I didn't believe you, I hurt you. In front of everyone." Her voice broke completely. "You told the truth, and I punished you for it. You deserve my respect. You deserve my trust. And I failed you. As a teacher, and as a person. I am so sorry." Mia looked from the weeping teacher to her father's calm, steady face. He gave her a small nod. The choice was hers. Mia took a breath, her small voice cutting through the emotional tension in the room. "My dad says that everyone makes mistakes. He says the important part is what you do after." She looked directly at her teacher. I think you need to believe kids more, even if their stories sound big." "I will, Mia," Mrs. Vance choked out, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I promise you I will." Just then, Noah was escorted back into the room by Mrs. Gable, who had been sent to retrieve him. General Thompson saw the boy's worried face, and after a quiet word from Mia, he understood who he was. The general walked over to Noah, extended his hand, and shook the boy's hand formally. "I'm told you stood up for my daughter," the general said, his voice warm. "That took courage. More courage than you know. Thank you." Noah's face lit up with a grin so wide it looked like it might split his face in two. "Why, yes, sir. Mia's my best friend." The social order of the classroom, so rigidly enforced by Mrs. Vance, was now completely upended. Mr. Albright, the CEO, approached General Thompson, his hand extended. "Sir, it is an honor. I sit in meetings all day with people who think they're important. What you just said about service and about listening, that was a lesson I needed to hear." Another parent, a woman who had been quiet all morning, came forward. "General, my husband is a master sergeant at Fort Belvoir. We just moved here. Thank you. Thank you for showing them what our lives are really like." Principal Henderson, seeing a path to redemption, made an announcement to the stunned room. Effective immediately, Northwood Elementary will be implementing mandatory implicit bias training for all faculty and staff. What happened in this classroom today is a failure of our core mission. It will not happen again. Mrs. Vance, still on her knees, looked up and nodded. "I'll be the first one to sign up," she whispered. Then, the general did something no one expected. He reached into the inner pocket of his uniform jacket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was a coin, thick and made of brass, with an intricate military crest on it. A command coin. He pressed it into Mrs. Vance's trembling hand. "Ma'am, I am not giving you this for what you did this morning," he said, his voice gentle now. "I am giving it to you for what you did just now. For that apology. That took a different kind of courage. Let it be a reminder. Growth does not come from our successes. It comes from how we handle our failures." Mrs. Vance clutched the coin as if it were a lifeline, nodding, unable to speak. For the next half hour, General Thompson held the classroom spellbound. He didn't talk about battles or strategy. He talked about teamwork. He talked about what it felt like to be a young soldier far from home. He answered questions about his uniform, about what the different medals meant, about whether the food in the army was really as bad as people said. He made every child feel seen, and every parent's career feel valued. At the end, Mr. Henderson suggested a class photo. The students gathered around the general, buzzing with excitement. Mia stood directly in front of him, her hand held firmly in his, her face alight with a smile that was pure, radiant joy. That photograph, snapped on the principal's phone, would soon find its way onto the school's social media page, and from there, into the wider world. But in that moment, it was just a picture of a father and a daughter who had been to a battlefield and back that morning, and a father who had come to bring her safely home. Finally believed. Finally seen. That evening, in their simple, tidy apartment, the same apartment Mrs. Vance had used as evidence of their insignificance, the Thompson family sat together on their worn but comfortable couch. Maria had come home early from work after a tearful, rambling phone call from Mr. Henderson. Now, she sat with Mia tucked under one arm, still in her work clothes. General Thompson sat on the other side, out of his uniform, back in his familiar jeans and a t-shirt. He was just Dad again. "How are you feeling, my little warrior?" Maria asked, stroking Mia's hair. "Tired," Mia admitted. "But good. What did you learn today, sweetheart?" her father asked, his voice gentle. Mia thought for a long moment. "I learned that telling the truth can be really, really hard. And scary. But you have to do it anyway." She looked up at her father. "And I learned that sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most." The words, so adult and painful, hung in the air. "But Dad," she asked, "why do we have to hide? If you had just told the school who you were from the beginning, none of this would have happened." It was the question that had been haunting him all afternoon. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Mia, your value, your worth, has absolutely nothing to do with the stars on my shoulders. You are important because you are you. You are kind and brave and honest. I never wanted you to grow up thinking you needed my rank to matter." He sighed. "But I see now that in trying to protect you, I put you in a terrible position. I made you carry a secret that was too heavy for you. You should never have had to fight that battle alone. And I promise you, that will never happen again." From that day forward, something at Northwood Elementary changed. The implicit bias training became a cornerstone of the school's culture. Mrs. Vance became its most passionate advocate, using her own story not as a source of shame, but as a powerful cautionary tale. She kept the command coin on her desk, a constant reminder of her failure and her redemption. Her classroom became a place where every child's story was treated as sacred. The photograph of the general and Mia went viral, a potent symbol of a truth defended and an injustice rectified. It sparked a national conversation about the quiet sacrifices of military families and the hidden biases that still existed in places like schools. But for the Thompson family, life returned to its quiet rhythm. General Thompson still went to his important job at the Pentagon. Maria still went to her housekeeping jobs, finding peace in her simple, orderly work. And Mia went back to being a fourth grader. But she was different. She walked a little taller. She spoke with a new confidence. She had faced down the dragons of doubt and disbelief, and she had won. Because she learned the most important lesson of all, that her truth was powerful, it was valid, and it was worth fighting for. And she knew, with an unshakable certainty, that her father would always, always have her back. And that brings us to the end of Mia's journey, a reminder that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes, it just needs to walk through the door. I hope this story of a father's loyalty and a daughter's courage gave you a moment of meaningful escape today. I'd love to know where you were while listening, maybe taking a quiet break or settling in for the evening. Let me know in the comments. I read them all. If you believe in standing up for the truth, hit that like button and subscribe. We are always refining our storytelling, so please share your feedback below. Thank you for being part of this story.